This episode is brought to you by NPR's Life Kit podcast. Let me tell you a true story. I was just outside in my backyard doing a little gardening and, as always, absolutely getting demolished by mosquitoes. Then I came in to record this very message right here about NPR's Life Kit, a show that gives you useful guidance to live your life a little better. And guess what their most recent episode is about? How to actually make yourself less attractive to mosquitoes. See, that is exactly the kind of advice you get from Life Kit, from fitness routines to mental resilience to navigating personal goals. Life Kit offers real stories, relevant insights, and clear takeaways. Finances, parenting, household chores. It's not just self-improvement, it is about living a better life starting right now. And yes, there's advice about mosquitoes. Look, I'm not going to spoil that episode for you. You should go listen to it. But that citronella candle, it's probably not doing anything. Anyway, go check out their list of episodes. I'm sure you will find something with some advice that you are looking for. Listen now to the Life Kit podcast from NPR. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, July 17th, 1902, it's very hot, no surprise, dead of summer, and Willis Haviland Carrier is going to do something about it. The week before, 7 people in New York City had died because of excessive heat. This was a real problem, especially in expanding urban areas like New York City. The heat was a major public health and infrastructure issue. But Carrier was a little less concerned with the people and their comfort and more with machines, which also didn't perform very well in the sweltering summer weather. So we'll get into it, but you probably, listeners, recognize that name, Carrier. It is still around today as one of the major air conditioning manufacturers, and that is what we're talking about here. That is what Willis Carrier did in the summer of 1902. He came up with the basic mechanisms for air conditioning, which of course had such an enormous impact on all of us. So here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello from my well air-conditioned house.
Hey there.
We are recording this, of course, dead of summer. It is starting to get steamy down here in my basement as well. Before we get to this story and the larger, really fascinating sort of history of air conditioning, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to all the folks who have joined the This Day newsletter on Substack. As people may know, we're making that the home for our America 250 coverage heading into next year. And your subscription gets you access to America 250 Watch and also helps us really plan and fund this year-long coverage that we're going to be doing all next year. A special shout out to the founding members who have stepped up. We haven't come up with a clever name for them yet, like semi-quincentennial heroes or something.
No. It's good. They like it.
No.
Semi-quincentennials.
No.
Yeah, there it is. But folks like Stuart and Nick and Leora and Marty, thank you, along with everyone else. You are a crisp, cool breeze of financial support on a muggy, sweltering day that is the media landscape. That's what you're really paying for, is the metaphors on this show.
You really worked that in there. You really worked
Yeah. I realized earlier this week how ominous America 250 Watch is, and that we will have to upgrade it at some point to America 250 Warning.
Warning, right.
But we're not there yet. It's coming.
And then what's the next one? Critical Get Out. So look, I want to talk about Carrier and his invention, but just to sort of foreshadow where we're going, I tend to be suspicious of the here's this one thing that explains everything thing, and I read the COD book and I read the Guns, Germs, and Steel. I've read all those books that are here's the one thing. You could convince me that air conditioning basically explains everything in the 20s.
Oh yeah.
It's incredible. And there have been some great books, including, I think, books about how air conditioning basically led to, the rise of the South in the United States and the sort of economic boom of the American century. But let's go to the beginning of that American century, 1902. What do we need to know about how people cooled themselves prior to air conditioning, Kellie?
I mean, if you want to take it back to the motherland and the ancient Egyptians,
hell yeah, let's go.
They would, as their own air conditioning system, hang water-soaked reeds in their windows so that whenever the wind blew, you got this sort of like cool breeze that you could sort of enjoy, which, you know, it's not practical for everybody. Most people just had to really just, you know, thug it out. Like, it was hot. Yeah. You took off as many clothes as you could. You got ice and you tried to store it for the summer months, which is kind of a complicated thing to do. But people would take frozen ice from like ponds or lakes that they, you know, had gotten from over the wintertime and then store them in a basement or some sort of like cooling shelter. And then
And to be clear, we've jumped from ancient Egypt to like the U.S.
Yes, the U.S.
The Northeast. Yes. Yeah. Not a lot of frozen ponds in Cairo.
Until then. The Egyptians were the only ones that kind of got it right. But yeah, I mean, that kind of was the only thing that you had available to you. And that's if you can get your hands on ice. For the most part, you could try to go swimming if you were by a cool lake. You could try sleeping outside when the temperature dropped at night, if the temperature dropped at night. But people pretty much had to struggle through it.
Just cope.
Yeah.
Have either of you encountered or been to parts of the world where they still use some of these kind of more, for lack of a better word, like natural ways of cooling, like the reeds or the just like smart construction or ventilation?
I'm only for heating.
At all.
Like when I was in, I went on like a safari in South Africa and it got really cold at night. And so they had these rubber bottles that they put boiling hot water in. And then they would put it at the foot of your bed. It was glorious, actually. I was like, oh my gosh, a foot warmer for the bed. But it took the edge off the chill and it was actually kind of ingenious.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty remarkable to sort of encounter some of these like architectural designs with like high ceilings and cross ventilation. Mm-hmm. And I've been in rooms that are kind of cooled in this way with like water, basically air passing over water. But I think, Kellie, to your point, it's like, wow, that's remarkable. It's like 5 degrees cooler in here, but it's still like, it's hot. And like the real answer is like less clothing, wait for the sun to go down, you know, swimming.
But in the Victoria era,
things.
You're not taking off clothes. You know, these people are still wearing 3-piece suits and pantaloons and corsets, you know?
Lots of layers.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's something fascinating about that architectural approach. So in the South, what they had were they had houses with bigger rooms and with all of these giant windows and with porches everywhere to try to get that cross breeze. Yeah. And with the invention of air conditioning, that becomes the exact wrong kind of place to have because the rooms are too big and you want small rooms and small windows in order to try to contain all of that coolness. So this is where Willis Haviland Carrier comes on the scene. Cornell University grad, so he and Andy Bernard. And he wasn't making a ton of money, but he was working for something called the Buffalo Forge Heating Company in upstate New York. And he was sent out one day to go to Brooklyn to this printing company that was having some problems. And the problem was, as those of you on the East Coast right now know, humidity got so bad in the summer. And this was a real problem for these finely tuned printers, these 4-color printers, which, as you can imagine, like, in order to get those 4 colors, you print on the page 4 different times. And the only way this works is if you're in the exact same spot each time and you can layer up those colors. But if it's off by just a little bit, then you get, I don't know, for those of you who like got the paper delivered back in ye olden days, you would get like the Sunday paper with the color cartoons, and every once in a while it would be just kind of off. And you would get these kind of like blurry, muddly pictures. Well, this is what was happening because the paper was really sensitive to the humidity. It would expand and contract, and they would try to run it through the system, but it was the wrong size. And so Carrier goes in there and he's like, how can we get the humidity out of the air? And this is how he begins to develop what would become air conditioning, which was not just an air cooling system, although it was that, but it was also trying to draw that humidity out of the air to make the air more comfortable. And that's ultimately what he develops, is this kind of humidity controller where air is forced through a filter over a compressor. It's pumped over these chilled coils, and those chilled coils both cool the air and they dry the air and they spit it back out. And suddenly you have these printers who can have like reliably sized paper and a cleaner print.
Communication is critical to your success in your personal and professional life. I'm Matt Abrahams, and I teach strategic communication at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and I host Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. I sit down with experts to discuss actionable advice that you can immediately apply to your life. We cover topics like managing communication anxiety, speaking better in the moment, maximizing your influence, and how to negotiate to get what you want and need. Listen wherever you get your podcasts to level up your communication.
So, there it is. That's the origin story. It's more about how do we keep machines running and then how do we make people comfortable. And I will admit that it took me way too long in life to realize that the conditioning in air conditioning is much more about humidity than it is about temperature. And that's why when you have an air conditioner, it drips water.
And why your skin gets so dry.
Yeah, and why fans aren't that great, because all they do is just blow air.
Blow humid air around. Correct. So, I want to talk a little bit about how quickly this gets adopted, both for commercial purposes and then obviously by the public. I mean, I will say, like a lot of new technology that sort of like radically shifts everything, there's a little bit of a pushback, and there's some really interesting literature about how kind of like experiencing the heat of summer was seen a little bit as a virtue. There's a quote from a curator at the Smithsonian who talked about it took a long time for people to adopt air conditioning because they saw like it would be acting against the ways of nature and God to like, subvert the humidity and the heat.
This is ex post facto kind of stuff. This is like the Puritan work ethic. Oh, it's so good that you're working 12 hours a day. It's good for your soul. It's good to like boil alive in the heat of New York City.
And the answer is probably we just can't afford this new technology, or it's really hard to install or whatever. Exactly, yes. But, those conversations were out there. And for a long time in New York City, there wasn't widespread air conditioning. And I think it actually was adopted in the South a little more and sort of facilitated the expansion of the South. But, when you're building new buildings and houses and so forth, it's easier than retrofitting all these old tenement buildings in New York City with proper air conditioning. But, it's pretty quick. I mean, by the 1920s, movie theaters have air conditioning, and that's, I think, a huge... So this is where we're starting to get into air conditioning explains everything territory.
Yes.
You talk about why was there the golden age of theaters in the 1920s, and, we've done episodes where we've talked about the stats. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's something like 2/3 of Americans saw a movie every week in like the 20s and 30s. Well, part of that is because those were the air-conditioned spaces, It wasn't just because the talkies were here, So, certainly played a part there. In 1925, so we're talking about 15, 20 years after Carrier sort of builds this and it starts to spread. 1925, Madison Square Garden starts to be able to actually store ice, and it can have consistent ice for ice hockey for the first time. Congress gets air conditioning in 1929, and there's this really fascinating theory that big government is facilitated by the rise of air conditioning because legislators can sit around and craft these big bills and debate stuff and sort of, which certainly fits into my longstanding theory that like heat is the main heat, and temperature and grumpiness because of that explains a lot of American politics. But
I think that this is actually, does air conditioning explain everything? But does it explain some of these big changes in government? It is the case that like people were not in Washington, D.C. in the summers. It was too hot. It was too muggy. People didn't want to be there. And Congress went out of session. Like you don't have year-round Congress. You don't even have like the year-round executive branch because Washington is a stupid swamp town and nobody wants to be there. And as soon as they put air conditioning in those buildings, productivity rockets up. Yeah. It goes up like 24%, where like people are there typing and sorting through files and things like that because it is possible to be there and be somewhat comfortable. So there is a real consequence politically and economically to having air conditioning. Yeah. Also environmentally, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Oh, yeah.
My friend told me, he was joking, but he was like, I firmly believe that there could be peace in the Middle East if everyone just had air conditioning and ice cream. Like we do an ice cream summit and we just like sit in the AC. I was like, maybe. But it definitely
couldn't hurt to try.
Couldn't hurt to try. I mean, ice cream never hurt anyone. But definitely, I mean, Americans have experienced it exponentially. The level of productivity that you can have when you are in a comfortable environment, you can literally work from sunup to sundown. And while I don't think that is a great thing at all, it does shape sort of the cultural landscape that we operate in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And certainly, when we think about the South and the Southwest, it really was the key that allowed for expansion in those areas.
Because who's going to Arizona? Who's living in Florida?
Right. Yeah.
Well, and this is where you see that architectural shift too, right? You have all of these new suburbs going up across the Sun Belt, and they are these small air-conditioned homes that look like the vernacular architecture of the South begins to change because the technology is different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One little thing I should have mentioned earlier, and just to sort of put it in context, it is a number of decades. It's not until kind of mid-century that air conditioning becomes a little more kind of like everywhere. But in New York City, especially, like if you look at photos of like heat waves from the like 20s, 30s, 40s, even into the 50s and 60s, like people went outside. That was like the main answer. And I was reading this account by Arthur Miller talking about a heat wave, I think some point in the 40s or 50s, but he talked about how everyone would leave their hot buildings and go sleep in Central Park. And they would bring their alarm clocks with them because they had to wake up and go to work the next day. And so if you were walking through Central Park at like 6:30 in the morning the next day, you would just hear this cacophony of alarm clocks going off.
That's very
such
cool.
an amazing little picture.
That is.
That we don't get anymore. Now we just hear the cacophony of the humming air conditioners and the dripping and all that stuff.
I mean, you could say that porch culture is in large part due to the fact that you didn't have air conditioning, and so you congregated outside. You slept out they had sleeping porches where you could just sort of like cool off at night.
And in New York, things like stoops and sitting out on stoops, because that was a lot more felt a lot better than being inside. I will say the phenomenon of walking through New York City and having the air conditioner water drop on your head. Don't care for that.
No,
not
ideal.
It's very gross.
Worst feeling. You're like,
I think I've mentioned on the show, but kind of one of my like key New York moments that I think about a lot was in the blackout in 2003. And I actually think of that as kind of the moment that New York in some ways moved past the trauma of 9/11, because there was this massive citywide blackout and people freaked out, rightfully so, because the memory of 9/11. And then they realized like, oh, it was just a sort of electrical failure. I think it was like some squirrel in the Great Lakes region blew out a transmitter or something. And air conditioning was not working. It was a hot night. People poured back out into the streets. They met their neighbors. Music was playing. Restaurants, which had lost their cooling and the food was about to spoil, started giving away food and drinks for free before the ice melted. And it was this real moment of like communion in New York City. And I think got a lot of people kind of past the trauma of 9/11. But, again, to your point, Kellie, like that stoop culture, that porch culture, it's not there as much necessarily. Though in New York City, certainly, like when the weather's hot, you still see the fire hydrants get open and cracked open, and people are out on the street.
But in the suburbs, no. There's no space to sort of corral around other than your yard.
Well, especially as cars got air conditioning too, and that happened in 1939. The first automobile with air conditioning was introduced, and it really then, I think, AC kind of really just accelerated the post-World War II boom.
Gosh, when I first read that they were first getting air conditioning in the cars in 39, I just think about like that feeling of getting into your car on a really hot day and just like pumping up the air conditioner so it's blowing directly on your face. Like that feels like that's like one of the classic feelings of summer.
Oh, man. I still have trauma from like my childhood when we drove from Illinois to Louisiana and our air conditioning went out in our van as we were leaving Louisiana to drive back in the heat of the summer. And it was those old school vans where the front passenger and driver windows would roll all the way down, but the back windows just sort of like peeked out like a little tent. It wouldn't roll all the way down. So we were just splashing water on each other in the back of the car, and it was like miserable. And you never appreciate air conditioning till it's gone.
I get panic attacks when it's too hot, and I can't escape the heat. And I was in an Uber in Washington, D.C. during that heat dome a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't have air conditioning.
Oh.
And I was just sitting in the back and I was dying. Oh. And I feel like I relate very much to you as a child in the back of that van.
Trapped in the van.
Okay, let's wrap up here. But Jacob, our researcher, posed a really interesting question, which is air conditioning the reason that Americans work through the summer, unlike Europeans who tend to get out of the city and go to the beach and sort of knock off for 2-3 months? What do we think?
Pretty good theory.
That mixed with the Puritan work ethic, I
mean, so I think it's a little chicken and egg, right? We kind of built systems to force ourselves to work, and then also we keep working because we have the systems to do it. But it is really interesting.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And that also, when I lived in Sydney, obviously the seasons are reversed, but they basically knock off work in early to mid-November and show up sometime in February. And I was like, that's because it's extremely hot. And you gotta get away.
Yeah. And of course, climate change is exacerbating a lot of this, especially in Europe. A lot of places and homes that are not built to accommodate air conditioning, and now the summers are getting much hotter than they've ever been. It is a real issue, and obviously the energy consumption of air conditioning, it's a catch-22 there, right?
Yeah. Air conditioning is melting the icebergs, ironically.
Yeah. All right. Last tidbit here about Carrier. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have a Carrier air conditioning powering their home or their office right now, or their refrigerator box truck. But Carrier himself died in 1950 at the age of 73. The company's still out there. It employs 53,000 people now. I mean, it is a giant. It's valued at $18.6 billion. American Heritage Magazine will give them the final word because they talked about Willis Carrier as a, quote, Johnny Icicle planting the seeds of climate control all across America. Is that a better or worse metaphor than the one I led the show with?
I really like Johnny Icicle.
Johnny Icicle's pretty good.
It is.
Yeah. All right. We'll give it to you, American Heritage Magazine. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
And thanks to everyone who is supporting us by subscribing to the newsletter. You can do that at thisdaypod.com. Stay cool, everyone.
Radiotopia.